We may or may not want to have some headphones on here for what's coming up. I actually can't play, these are screenshots. I can't play any of these videos because it is just so riddled with profanity. A lot of what's been happening during this week for all kinds of reasons, it is really, really interesting to watch, and I think provocative and good for us to think through some of these things. Obviously, a lot of people very angry with how the election went, and many of them went to their phones and to TikTok, and they used that as their outlet. They used that as their version of emotional release therapy, whatever you would like to call it. Now, some of it gets really interesting. Jimmy Kimmel cried, so that's fun. The guy behind him was doing his own live kind of election results sort of podcast. He was wearing his White Dudes for Harris t-shirt, and when things went bad, he tore it off and he stormed off of his own podcast. The gal in the upper right-hand corner there, I don't know if you guys have seen some of this, but it is at least a small trend amongst gals like this. They've shaved their heads since Tuesday. They're trying to say several different things and put different things across. And I like Eric. I mean, I'm really hurt by Eric shaving his head this way. Yeah, it just happens to guys. It's okay. Shaving their heads because of this. Now, these things just kind of show up in your feeds. I mean, you can go hunt for them, but then you've just got to kind of be ready for the stuff that you hear. But these things are all over the place, and it's interesting from my eyes to watch a lot of this. I think in a lot of these scenarios, we're going to end up talking about fear and the power of fear and what to do with it and a biblical way of reflecting on fear. But it's interesting to me that you probably have a lot of young people whose family structure is pretty broken, no father or kind of a broken father figure in their lives. More likely than not, certainly not a belief in God, at least the God of Scripture. Even if they believe that something exists, a certain kind of foundation that exists in the God of Scripture is most likely not there. So we've got some really interesting things happening right now. There we go. There really are consequences for being susceptible to fear. So it's a lot of those kinds of things. And then another minor trend amongst young ladies is the rediscovery of an ancient poison that allegedly some lady in Italy used to kill 600 men. And so now what they are doing is they're regathering the formula for this poison so that they can allegedly feed it to the men who are in their lives who voted for Trump. That's a pretty significant reaction to an election going away that you don't want it to go. Then you get a lot of random things like this. This mom, kind of in her own smarmy, sarcastic way, is saying, well, now because Trump is in power, X, Y, and Z is going to happen, so now I have to give my 17-year-old daughter an IUD. This manner of thinking that sees things this way, that is at least in this moment unable to think in other ways or to emotionally deal with something that to them is a significant kind of pain, I think is really genuinely significant. Now, this is a list of several things that have been promised are going to happen over the next few years. Some of you may have seen some of these videos, these 3 to 5 minute videos that the president-elect has put out. Here's what I promised to do, what I promised to do, what I promised to do. A few of these things are what's causing a lot of this fear and anger and vitriol. And again, to me, it's significant for a couple of different reasons. And I have to admit, I listen to some of these and I laugh, just because of the stuff that he's kind of going after and why. To remove the accreditation of colleges that continue DEI and racial racist admission practices. He literally wants to remove their accreditation, so there's a good chance that if all of this plays out the way that it does, the University of Michigan and Yale and other colleges like that might actually lose their accreditation or be forced to change their admission practices. Again, I just listen to this and I don't know. I laugh. I'm sorry. That's just what I do when I listen to this kind of stuff because I think it's great. In censorship in the federal government and prosecute agencies and individuals who have taken away First Amendment rights. So promising to do that in X, Y, and Z kinds of ways. End a lot of the trans-supporting nonsense, especially federal dollars that go towards transitioning or transing kids. The federal government will officially recognize only 2 genders. Now, to say that out loud, the reason I have this is to sort of connect some of these out-of-control reactions with what I want to talk about. What does it say about what's happened in our culture over the last several years that these kinds of things have to be said out loud and that someone is promising that this is going to become actual official policy in my administration, that we're only going to recognize 2 genders? I mean, on Tuesday nights, we've been talking so much about critical theory, critical race theory, broadly speaking, the woke culture and how it works. But we've gotten to this point because of what a lot of this kind of secularist pagan leftism has done inside of our culture, that, an election has this kind of tension, this kind of cultural layer of tension that's involved with it. So what does it say about where we've gone to that this is the kind of thing that actually has to be said and is getting reacted to in really, really dramatic fashion? Here we go. Here we go, Meg. Bam. Sorry. Has anybody made their bingo cards yet? All right. I want to talk about this. This has been on and off my mind for several years now. And over the last couple of days, it has dawned on me that, at least to my eyes, a lot of these kinds of things that we're watching fit into very much the same bucket as a lot of what happened in 2020 and 2021. And that bucket is the bucket of fear and manipulation. Being able to frighten people enough to get them to behave a certain way, do certain things that in other contexts they would consider to be utterly irrational. And yet people will do it because fear, we've discovered and we know, is just a very powerful pressure point. And when you can find it and when you can leave your thumb on that pressure point, you can do some incredible things to people. So this is a philosopher by the name of Scott Bader Say, who is reflecting on some of the work that the Christian theologian Thomas Aquinas did on a biblical understanding of fear. And so he distills some of it, and I love this quote. Keeping a people in thrall to fear serves the interests of those who hold power, precisely because fear seeks order and stability and militates against social change. Thus, the circle is closed. And here's what he means by stability. Thus, the circle is closed. Fear brings us together to fend off the things we fear. Yet because we must continue to fear to maintain our unity, we cannot ever actually overcome our fears. Indeed, those who have the power to address the causes of fear will be least likely to do so because fear benefits those who claim to protect us. That's really interesting stuff. I think that's very revealing stuff as well. And this can happen on a person-to-person, literally a one-on-one interpersonal basis. And it can happen, as we have watched, on a large societal, national scale. People who do have or allegedly have the ability to alleviate our fears discover very quickly that they benefit from us being afraid, and so they won't. But instead, they will continue to press on that open nerve and keep people afraid. And it has this bizarre unifying effect on people that if we all just do the same thing, then somehow we're going to be able to protect ourselves and keep ourselves under control. But what he says, and I think the dynamic that we have been watching for a long time now is, but as soon as that trigger is made and those decisions are made, it becomes harder and harder to break out of that. And so the cycle just is perpetual. We have to keep up the fear so we can keep up the control, which means we have to keep up the fear, which means we have to keep up the control. So Thomas Aquinas is this incredible medieval Christian theologian and philosopher. If you think that some topic has never been discussed by any Christian theologian or philosopher, just Google that topic with Thomas Aquinas, and he's probably written 300 pages on that particular topic. It was interesting to me a few years ago. I'm at home. It's COVID. I'm trying to find stuff to do. I hunted and hunted and hunted and hunted for good philosophy and Christian theology on the topic of fear, because it was just fascinating me what was going on. And there just wasn't a lot until I found Thomas Aquinas and the way that he talks about fear, what God has built into us, and when fear is right, and when and how fear goes wrong. And I think this is significant because it helps us reflect. It helps us personally reflect on ourselves and on those around us, and maybe even find ways to find a certain degree of sympathy or ways in which to help and pray for people, right, when we watch these dynamics at play. So Thomas Aquinas teaches that on a very basic level, and you always have to start here. Fear can actually be a very natural and reasonable thing. You run across a bear in the woods, and God has designed you to be afraid enough, to be smart enough to run away, right? So you begin on this very basic, almost survival level, and Aquinas says, God's actually built that into you. It's the right emotion. It's the right response. No time to tangle with a bear right now. It's time to leave, right? So we have those kinds of instincts within us. In the way Aquinas used the word, this is actually how God has built us, and this is actually very good. But God has built these emotional reactions to the world within us, like fear, and God has also built into human beings the capacity to reason, to think through a situation, and to make decisions either independent from our emotions or in relationship with our emotional reaction to a situation. So he says, well, we've actually been given this capacity of reason, and God is going to expect us to use this capacity to decide whether or not it is wise to be afraid in this situation. And so Aquinas goes so far as to say there are situations in which we show fear that is not just unreasonable, but is actually a sin against God. If fears overpower our reason, we will act irrationally and possibly even sin, because we're allowing fear to take a place it shouldn't take. Reason, God-given reason, gives us something else to do, and it should supersede that fear. If we're thinking rationally, he argues, we can temper our fears and act either courageously or righteously. Being courageous does not mean that we've decided there's nothing to be afraid of. Being courageous means doing what we believe to be the right or God-honoring thing, even in the face of reasons to be afraid or worried about something. This is literally what courage is. Something might go wrong, but I'm going to do what is the right thing to do anyway. Righteousness has the same, plays the same role in this kind of context. To do what is God-honoring, to do what is moral in the eyes of God, to display Christ-like virtue when I have all kinds of reasons to not do that. Those reasons are real and can be very pressing upon us. But Aquinas keeps on pushing this little button where he says, but you're a human being with reason, God-given reason, and you need to use it in a way that's going to enable you to make these courageous and righteous decisions at the right times. So when fear and courage collide, courage is often the right and God-honoring choice. So one of the things Aquinas says here in this context is he says that reason dictates that certain goods are to be sought after more than certain evils are to be avoided. So just because something bad might happen, you still might have really good reason to still do what is right to do. So we have certain goods are to be sought more, and certain evils are to be avoided. So the act of fear then, in the wrong context, overrides another gift that God has given us, and that is reason, and I guess we could even put it in this context, obedience. So a little bit more about fear and power and sin. According to Aquinas and others, we sin when we do not trust God. When we're going to trust something else instead of trust who God is, the kinds of things that he has promised us, trust that if we do the right thing in God's eyes, then we just sort of let God take it from there, that we trust other things instead of God in his will and his law. Do I truly believe that God is sovereign and he's providentially in control, or don't I? And we're just going to run up against those kinds of situations inside of our lives. And in very dramatic situations, you can ask the question, well, who do you fear most? Human beings, or do you fear God? And those are those moments of, do I choose righteousness or do I choose sin? So who am I most worried about offending, God or other human beings? We sin when we do harm to our family, our friends, or our neighbors to assuage our own fear. When we actually cause damage or harm to others because I am afraid of something, in certain contexts, that can actually lead to a certain kind of sin. That we're not loving our neighbors properly and we're not behaving righteously in the appropriate context. And biblically speaking, often we can sin when we avoid courage or reason or righteousness. And we sin when we do not show others the way out of, it shouldn't be our. We sin when we do not show others the way out of manipulative fear. This is one of the things I found so fascinating over the last 4 years is how many people who had themselves as Christian leaders just kept pushing fear and kept pushing fear and kept pushing fear for a very long time. Friends, there are some of them that are still doing it in the context of 2020 and 21, and they are still pushing the same fears that people were pushing a while ago. When we do that, we lock people into these horrible places. This is, I think, this is not unique to me. So when I say I think this is insightful, I'm not talking about something I came up with. I think this is actually really interesting. People who have been frightened into their beliefs can rarely be reasoned out of them. That's going to take a while because they've got powerful emotional reasons for their beliefs. So they might need to be led out of it as much as they need to be talked out of it. So what does it look like to lead the way in courage and righteousness as opposed to ways in which that keep people locked inside of their fears? I talk about it in this context because it just, as I watch these things, it keeps coming up to me, and I keep watching individuals in their anger, in their envy, in their spite, and in these moments of significant and deep hatred for people that they've never met and never known. And there's got to be something inside of the Christian heart that just absolutely breaks when you watch that. Because there's got to be a way out of this. There's got to be another way for God to be at work inside of people's lives where there's so much more beauty and joy inside of the kingdom of God than where we often find ourselves. So, a lot of what's happened over this last week has just been fascinating on a lot of levels, but I wanted to make sure we talked some about the notion of fear and that there's a way of thinking about it biblically as well.